Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Ohio State's AD's comments about Michigan and how their sign stealing scandal definitely adds a little bit of an asterisk to the wins they had a year ago, and how I love that energy. And it's something that we need more and more of in college football. So, big fan of what Gene Smith said, big fan of more guys getting into that energy. But let's jump into my post-spring top 25. I have 25 through 11 in this segment, then we'll get to the top 10 in the following. But before we jump into that, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question at the top of the queue, get it on the screen, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. Huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's fun for all of us. But let's jump right in here, and let's talk about my 11 through 25. We're going to start at 25 and kind of work our way up to 11 just because I feel like that's the best way to go about this. But I kick it off with number 25, Virginia Tech, and this is just Kyron Drones. This is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire ACC, a dude that can flip that entire conference on its head this entire year. He can make that team a not only ACC contender, but then a playoff contender, because that's the way of the world now. It's very likely that they walk into that Week 5 matchup against Miami undefeated, and Miami could as well if they can knock off a team like Florida at the beginning of the year. So all of this stuff is setting up for Virginia Tech to be in a position where if you're walking out of Week 5 undefeated, that team gets really interesting. They're number one returning in production in the entire country. They barely beat out Washington for this list. That was one of the teams I was fighting between. I just did it because of the quarterback stability there, where Washington's still kind of fighting a battle, which we'll actually get to a little bit later in the show. But NC State's right above them, so a little bit of run on some ACC teams here, and Grayson McCall coming in and having the receivers he's going to throw to, and Noah Rogers, Kevin Concepcion, Justin Jolie at the tight end position. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be one of the very, very cool things to watch throughout this year. Definitely need some playmakers to emerge on the defensive side of the ball, especially with Cam Riley, that very talented linebacker finding his way to FSU. So you're definitely going to need some guys to step up, but there's tons of talent on this team, and I expect them to be one of the most potent offenses in the entire ACC. And then we get to Kansas. This is just Jalen Daniels is one of the most under-talked about stars in college football. Every time I see this kid on the field, he does something that is absolutely jaw-dropping. He is a remarkable athlete, can throw the ball a lot better than people give him credit for, has struggled with injuries in the past, but when this kid is healthy, this team plays really, really high-level football. It's happened over the last couple of years where he came into the scene and people didn't necessarily expect a lot. He took over for Jason Bean, and they started 5-0, and everyone kind of lost their minds there for a second. It did kind of temper throughout the season with an injury to Jalen Daniels being involved, but this team will have a ton to say in the Big 12 race. The Big 12 race is going to be absolutely wild, as you can see with some of the names that are on this list. There's tons of people right around each other when it comes to the Big 12 right now. And then you have SMU out of the ACC, a new ACC team. This team is really, really good, and it all starts with Preston Stone. He's coming back, and that's absolutely huge for them. You know, there's a guy that I'm almost 100% sure that he got a couple of calls this offseason thinking, you know, you want to come play X at X university or Y university, and he decided to stay in Dallas. They do get Florida State in Week 5. They likely will be undefeated in that game. Now, they do have to overcome games at BYU and TCU, but both those games are winnable for this team. They are probably the better team in that game, so I'd lean for them. And then Florida State's got to come to Dallas to play, something they have not done in quite some time, especially in ACC play, have probably never done. So definitely will be an interesting game, and a game that could define the ACC in a lot of ways this upcoming season. Then you have Texas A&M. The talent is just out the door. I mean, you have so many guys in this room. It's still plentiful when you talk about the amount of guys they have, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Even when you lose all those guys, there's still so much talent there. You need Connor Wegman, obviously, to take that next step. I do believe he will do that. I think this wide receiver group is going to be really fun to watch. Noah Thomas is one of the more underrated guys in the country, in my opinion, and to be totally honest, with the talent they have on defense and Mike Elko calling the shots, I have very little worry about this defense, at the very least being formidable and causing some problems for some teams for sure. But then let's move on to Oklahoma State, number 4 in the country in returning production, and a lot of that is because of the running back they're bringing back in Ollie Gordon. He won the Doak Walker a year ago, just a guy that is an absolute beast. He can do so many different things in the run game and also in the pass game, can utilize him in different ways. The O-line will be one of the best in the country, and Mike Gundy just wins football games. So whenever the Big 12 comes around and people overlook Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy has no problem with that because he always ends up answering the bell. He did a year ago where a lot of people didn't even think they would be in the conversation to be in Arlington, and they found themselves right there with Texas. So I think this conference is going to be crazy. I think Oklahoma State's one of those teams that is flying a little bit too under the radar, that is more than happy to be there. And then we get to Kansas State, another Big 12 team here. Avery Johnson is at the very top of my list when it comes to appointment television guys. And actually, that's a good top 10 Tuesday idea that I'll probably do next week. Dylan Edwards is actually not far down that list, to be totally honest with you. This team is set up to be absolutely in the thick of things for this conference. I think the offensive line is going to be really solid. I think the defense, you definitely need some guys to step up in big-time defensive roles, but also some depth roles and rotational running linebackers and corners and things of that nature. But Chris Kleiman makes things happen. There's a lot of times where you look at that roster and it's not necessarily what you would expect, and then they come out in the field and they play just incredible football. So I'm not necessarily super worried about that. I think they'll be able to put it together and rival Utah at the very top of that Big 12. Then you get to Florida State, a little bit lower than some people might expect on here, but when you look at Florida State, it all comes down to DJ Uiagalelei. I think we all understand that. But the reality is, DJ hasn't necessarily put together a season that makes you feel over the moon confident if you're a Florida State fan. Now, I think the ability is fantastic. We've seen it in spurts throughout his college career, but it's never been a consistent thing. And if you're going to compete for the ACC, especially in a year where there's, 5 different teams that are right below you or right above you, in Clemson's case, that are ready to kind of take that throne, it's going to be tough. It's going to be one of those things where he has to hit, and if he doesn't hit, it could look really ugly for Florida State. That being said, if he can put it together and, have the best season he's had in his college career, what most people do when they get around Mike Elko, I think, or not Mike Elko, Mike Norvell, I think he'll be more than fine. The defense is going to be incredible. You have Patrick Payton as one of the best edge rushers in the entire country. A lot riding on the portal group. They should be able to put it together, but I do have my questions about DJ Uiagalelei's ability to lead this team to where they want to go, which is an ACC title and a playoff. But then we get into Miami, a team that really has done incredible things throughout this spring. Cam Ward coming in is as big as it possibly gets. You have Xavier Restrepo, you have Jacoby George out there. Can Cam Ward execute at that very high level? Well, the ceiling's really high. I know that for a fact. The question is, can he get to that ceiling? If he does, I think they're a playoff team. They have one of the best O-lines in the entire country. Big-time portal additions with Simeon Barrow Jr. on the defensive line and Damian Martinez as probably one of the best running backs in the entire country coming over from Oregon State. So a ton going into this year, a ton being pushed into a little bit of an all-in year for Miami. So a lot is aligning in the right way. You need some things to fall your way, but Miami's building something, and it feels like they're ready to go full throttle and possibly win the ACC this upcoming year. Then we get to Oklahoma, a team that, in my mind, only really has 2 questions. I look at this roster, and it's really, really, really good, especially at skill positions. They have dudes across the field, but the 2 big questions are probably the 2 most important things when you're talking about winning in the SEC, and those are the lines of scrimmage. Neither of them look necessarily uber strong. The O-line is a little bit more worrisome than the D-line, but the D-line's not necessarily strong. You brought in Dominic Williams, which helps that a ton, but then you lost Jermaine Lole to Texas, so it got a little bit more sketchy. So I think it's one of those things where if those lines of scrimmage can put it together, and that's a rather big if as of right now, I think Jackson Arnold's going to be incredible. I think this team is capable of a lot of really big things. It's just, you have two question marks that you do not want to have right now if you're Oklahoma. But let's move on to Clemson at 15. From my point of view, Clemson didn't get outright better from a year ago. There's nothing that I can straight up point to and say this is definitely a better team than a year ago. That being said, there's a lot of potential in that wide receiver room. Cade Klubnik could take that next step. Barrett Carter could become one of the best defensive players in the entire country. So things can start to, snowball for them and get moving in the right direction. But it is going to be a little bit tough. You do have some things that definitely are big-time question marks. You lost some big-time guys on the back end of that defense. The wide receiver group is still a big question mark, even though there is a big-time potential in that room. So they are the team to beat in the ACC in my mind, just because that defense is going to be good, led by Barrett Carter, but it's very, very razor-thin margins. They're not necessarily far above Miami or Florida State or even SMU, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be fascinating to watch all of this unfold. I would say Clemson's up at the top right now, but it is very close over there in the ACC. Then we'll get to Tennessee. Nico Iamaleava is the unknown here, right? He's the one that you're a little bit worried about. But if he can meet the hype that Joe Milton was not able to reach in 2023, he's going to roll. He's going to be incredible. I think he's a much better player than Joe Milton from a just breaking down defensive standpoint, being more accurate, throwing, not only deep balls well, even though Joe Milton didn't do a great job of that last year. But in general, I think he's just a better quarterback, a better fit for Josh Heupel. The wide receiver group is awesome. Tons of guys that can make plays, like 5 different guys that I think will be big-time feature guys in this offense. And then you have James Pierce Jr. on the defensive side of the ball, and that might just be all you need. With how dominant this guy is, he can do things that not a lot of people in the country can do. But let's move on to Arizona. Noah Fifita, heading into year two, has expectations out the roof. This dude definitely has a lot of eyes on him, a lot of people expecting a lot from him. And when you have Tatori McMillan by your side and you have that connection, it's going to go pretty well 9 times out of 10. So I expect him to have a great year. There could be, a little bit of a regression, a little bit of a sophomore slump, but nothing too bad, I don't think, by any means. Dwayne Akina at defensive coordinator for them, I think, is going to be able to put together a really good defense, bringing back a guy like Takario Davis from the portal where you felt like you were going to lose him for quite some time. Getting him back is absolutely massive for them, and definitely a team that you could see in Arlington in December if they can put it together on that defensive side of the ball. And then you look at LSU. There are questions here. There's no two ways about that. Mainly on the defensive side of the ball, you worry about that D-line, but if you can put together a, okay defensive line, I think you can be really successful. It doesn't even have to be great, because I think this offense is going to be not necessarily as good as they were a year ago. That would be incredibly hard to pull off, but I think if you keep Garrett Nussmeier upright, he can pick apart pretty much any defense in the entire country, and he's going to be upright a lot because this is the best offensive line in the country, in my opinion. The wide receiver group did lose 2 of the top, 4 guys in the draft this past draft cycle, but you have guys like Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Adam Anderson, all very, very talented guys that can step into that role, along with Mason Taylor catching passes at tight end. So I think they'll be more than fine on the offensive side of the ball, but defense leaves a lot to be desired. And then you have Michigan. The main reason Michigan edged out LSU here is I know their defense is going to be at the very least top 25 in the country. I think it's going to be higher than that, to be totally honest with you. When you talk about the guys up front, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, it is an embarrassment of riches. It reminds me a lot of that duo they had over there at Texas last year, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, where these guys are going to make it tough on every single team. And, some other things could be wrong with this team, whether it's, with Texas, it was the back-end defense and losing guys over top. Maybe for Michigan, it's something like, tackling and doing things of that nature, or maybe getting to the quarterback in pass rush. Whatever that looks like, these guys are going to make that look a lot nicer and a lot more clean because they're going to disrupt pretty much every single play. You add Will Johnson on the back end, and this defense is going to be really, really good. I have no doubts about that. Alex Orji coming in at quarterback is the big question, but I think that run game is going to be elite. I think the baseline is just really, really solid over there at Michigan, so I don't necessarily see them bottoming out too much. They definitely, will take a step back from a year ago, but I don't necessarily see them being, an 8-4, 7-5 team. I see them more as 9-3, 10-2, battling in pretty much every game they're in. So that gives you an idea of where I sit from 11 to 25. That was the tough part, to be totally honest with you, because formatting those teams, ordering those teams is not an easy thing to do, but we're going to get to the top 10 after this break, so stick with us and we will break down who I think is at the very, very top of college football going into this year right after this.